Maize and cowpea requires supplementary irrigation around flowering. Yeah, irrigation is very, very important around flowering. One thing that if there's inadequate irrigation around the time of flowering of maize and cowpea, the resultant effect will be poor filling, for poor milking and poor filling of the pods of the cobs. So there should be, if your maize and cowpea must lack water, it's it should not be uh around the time of flowering. There must be adequate irrigation at flowering. Rice requires controlled water regime, flooding for lowland types. Yeah, for the lowland type of rice, the lowland varieties, they need flooding. Like we call them in our native parlance, I would say they should be planted in swamps. Yeah, in flooded places. Drip irrigation recommended for high value crops where feasible. Avoid waterlogging for most upland crops. For most upland crops, avoid waterlogging, except for rice. I stress that, except for rice. Weed control. We have the manual weed method of controlling weed. You weed first at 2 weeks to 4 weeks after planting. Then second weeding should be around 6 to 8 weeks after planting. Herbicides, even though I'm not an advocate of use of herbicides, but we have the pre-emergence herbicides. Example, the atrazine for maize. We have the post-emergence depending on the crop. Yeah, these herbicides depends on sometimes they are crop specific. You need to know the one to apply to which crop. We also have the cultural method, like the use of cover cropping, mulching, and the proper spacing. When you use cover crops, they help to do what? Suppress them weeds. You mulch, that one mulch and suppress weeds very, very perfectly. And the proper spacing too. If you space out your crop so much, then weed becomes a problem. Standard spacing is very, very important for weed control. Now let's look at diseases and pests of some of these arable crops. Common examples for maize, we have the armyworm, we have the stem borer, we have the leaf blight. Please, after this lecture, I will upload a video of what an armyworm, of the one that ravage our maize in Nigeria. I will upload a video of about just 30 seconds or 40 seconds. That's the video, the one we removed from our faculty farm the other day. So you see what the armyworm looks like. So first, I continue again. Common examples for maize: we have the armyworm, we have the stem borer, we have the leaf blight. For rice, we have the blast, we have stem borers, we have sheet blight. For cowpea, we have aphids, we have pod borers, we have the mosaic virus. Yeah, we have the mosaic virus. For cassava, we have the cassava mosaic disease, we have the mealybug. These ones you should be very, very aware of, because cassava is one of the most common crops around Nigeria, especially the southern Nigeria. So we have the cassava mosaic disease and the mealybugs, and control measures discussed in the IPM session. So when we get to the IPM session, I will tell you about the control measures of these pests and diseases of common arable crops in Nigeria and Africa. So harvesting, processing, storage, and marketing of field crops. Let's start from harvesting. Harvesting at physiological maturity to minimize, yeah, harvest at physiological maturity to minimize losses. One question is, what is physiological maturity? I will explain that in towards. Okay, now let me talk about it now. Physiological maturity is that stage where the crop is actually fully mature, like fully ripe. Maybe let's use things like maybe fruits now as an instance. You will see something like an orange is still looking green. Or okay, let me not use orange. Let's use something like tomato. It's still looking green, but the farmer still what harvest. The farmer still harvest and keep it to do what ripen over time. The farmer knows that yeah, this particular tomato is how actually ripe, like I don't know, is actually mature, fully mature. That's physiologically it has attained what maturity, but not yet ripened. You can harvest at that stage. In your cowpea, once they are physiologically, once they are mature, you don't need to wait until they turn purely brown before you do what? Before harvesting. If you wait for them to turn purely brown before harvesting, that means the losses will be much in the field. They will be what? They'll be shattering in the field. So once they turn yellow, you don't need to wait for them to turn brown before harvesting. Once they turn yellow, at that stage, you say they've attained physiological what? Maturity, and you can harvest. So that's about harvesting. Harvest at physiological maturity to minimize what? Losses. Even things like rice, you don't need to wait until the rice turns purely brown and dry on the on the grass, on the rice grass. If you do that, that means plenty of the seeds, the rice grains will do what? Fall on the ground and the losses will be what? Much. So to minimize such losses, harvest once they turn what? Yellow to what? Brown. Don't allow them to stay there until they are fully 100% uh, ripened. So minimize the second one is use simple tools like sickle, knife, or mechanized options where available. For cassava, harvest 10 to 12 months depending on the variety. Let's talk briefly about processing. This is very, very important to me because most farmers run losses in their farm, not because they are not doing well, but because they are not processing. They do what they produce and sell raw, which is not the best for a farmer, which is not the best for the farmer. So the farmer should be able to do what? Process to a little extent if you cannot process fully. So for maize, you do the shelling and the drying. Rice, do the threshing, milling, and polishing. Very important. So you see some farmers, they will just harvest their rice, dry it and sell it that way. Another person will do the threshing, after the another person will do the milling and the polishing, which is not and now sell at a more exorbitant price. So for cassava, peeling, grating, fermenting, and drying, you can garify too or can process into flour. So these are some processing some things you can do to increase your earning, your the money you make from your farm produce. Sugarcane, that one you crushing and juice extraction. So let's talk about storage. Dry grains to 12 to 13% moisture content, or let me raise it by 1%. Between 12 and 14% moisture content. This is very important. The grains should be properly dry to avoid to reduce the risk of those consuming them eating aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are not good for human consumption. So, and one of the ways to reduce aflatoxin from grains like groundnut and all the rest of them is by drying what very, very well, drying to 12%, between 12% and 14% moisture content. Use sacks, cribs, silos, or airtight containers for your storage. Apply hermetic storage. Yeah, apply hermetic storage to avoid chemical contamination. Marketing and utilization. Marketing and utilization. Market outlets, rural markets, aggregators, and millers. Utilization. Utilization, yeah, for me is you process yes for food, feed, and industry. Rice, household consumption, breweries. Cassava for gari, fufu, and industrial starch. Cowpea, that's for protein source and flour. Sugarcane for sugar, ethanol, and molasses. You know what molasses is, or molasses are. So maybe we'll discuss that also in our next class. And you do me one favor, drop your questions here, because your questions here will determine what we are going to discuss in our next class. So let's look at pest and disease. Pest and disease.